New versions of consoles are always a shiny and fun thing to get excited about, but historically there have been times where a newer version of the system isn't necessarily the outright best version of it. We've had some slimline reductions and things before, where some things are gained, but some things are lost, which with this new PlayStation 5 that Sony has released raises the question to me. While the original PS5 is still available on market shelves, not completely phased out just yet in favor of this one, is it worth trying to grab one of those while you still can? So I've been using this as my main PS5 this past week, putting it through its paces, trying it out, playing games, looking over some of the differences between this and the original, to talk about whether or not this feels like the outright better version to have, or if there is maybe some reason why you might want to track down the original while there is still time. Real quick, as part of this review, I do want to shout out, there's a lot of hardware going on for PlayStation right now. I just did an unboxing of the PlayStation Portal the other day. I got a full review of that coming up on the way soon. The Pulse Explorer is releasing in early December. So if you want to see any of that content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. Now there's a couple different things to go over. I'm going to start with the physical design because that's obviously one of the big obvious changes. And then we'll get into some of how it actually handles and performs compared to the original system. As far as the body goes, immediately the big thing is that it is a smaller system. PlayStation themselves are not using the Slim branding for this, though a lot of people already are, including retailers. But while it may not be by a massive amount, it is a smaller system. It's smaller in all directions, and when you're comparing this to the original system side by side in tower mode, one of the areas where it's a little closer is the width. The thickness of the systems are just not that huge of a difference, but it is a considerably shorter system and not nearly as deep, making it a lot more noticeable, I think, actually, if you're using the system in a horizontal style rather than vertical, where that difference in footprint can become a lot more noticeable. It's ultimately still not a small system. I mean, it's the size of the original PS3. Thank you very much, Mystic, for pointing that out. But when compared to the original PS5, it is smaller. And I'll say, as someone who ends up transporting their systems a lot because I'm always setting up at different places, I'm taking it between home and office, that kind of thing, the reduced size of this PS5 along with the reduced weight does make a difference when I'm constantly moving it between places. It's not as if the original PS5 is this massive unmovable object, but this one's definitely easier to deal with. Other changes to the physical design of the system include how we're handling stands and the covers of the system. Obviously with this one, it's a 4-cover setup rather than a pair like on the original. I actually like how these ones remove more. It feels like a simpler, more straightforward mechanism of just hold the front of the cover and pull up, as opposed to the original where you had to lift one specific corner and then press down. Though I will say something about the way these ones are designed, it actually feels a little more awkward to put the covers back on, given you're not doing that super often. It's really just when you want to add or remove an SSD or the disk drive, or if you're buying new replacement covers in a different color and you want to add those on. So it's not the biggest deal in the long run. The stand, on the other hand, depending on whether or not you're the kind of person where you're going to change the orientation of the system, it is a little bit awkward on this one. The way they've worked it out is that there are 2 different stands, one of which comes with the system for horizontal, and the other one is a vertical stand that you have to buy separately for $30. I will say in the case of this disc model, because of the increased footprint of where the disc reader goes and how it actually has a larger, flatter base, the vertical stand doesn't really feel that necessary. I've been using it in tower mode all this time without it, and it's been fine. But I could absolutely see how with the digital model having the 2 thinner plates where it would be more necessary. Also, if you're in a situation where you think it might get bumped more often because of pets or kids or whatever, that could be a case for vertical stand being more necessary as well. I could also maybe see some kind of very long-term argument of, oh, it's not great to put this much pressure on just the side covers over a long period of time. We'll just have to see in the long run how that plays out. For horizontal mode, the included stands are a little awkward because of the fact they're not used in the other method. Basically means that either if you're swapping often, whenever you're in vertical mode, you either have to leave the feet in or put them away somewhere safe so you don't forget, which in my case is a very dangerous thing to do, which is why it's still sitting on my system right now. I think for most people, you're gonna ultimately figure out which way you prefer to have your console and just leave it that way forever, so it's kind of a moot point. But if you are the kind of person where you like having the ability to swap between, you could see yourself adjusting it at some point depending on what entertainment system it's going in. Yeah, the feet solution isn't super great. It doesn't bother me visually with how the system's set up, but the fact that it's just these 2 little plastic feet you could easily lose down the line is a little bit of a headache. Another change in the physical design of the system is the port setup on it. We have the same total number of USB ports, but the balance of C to A has shifted, with having 2 USB-C ports up front and 2 USB-A ports in the back. This is something I've talked about if you've seen my previous PS5 Slim videos, where I'm not the biggest fan of this, primarily because there are a lot of third-party accessories that rely on USB-A for the connection, including things where it's a hardwired setup, so you can't even swap the cable out. And in fact, even PlayStation's own first-party Pro Controller option, the DualSense Edge, comes with a USB-C to A cable. Ultimately, you can still use these with the system, you just plug them into the back. It just feels a little more awkward to me. It's nice that the system does ship with a C2C cable, so you have an easy way of plugging into the front when you're charging regular controllers. There's just a whole lot of third-party accessories out there that still rely on A, and being able to plug into the front would be nice for those. At the end of the day, if this really bothers you, you can buy an adapter to fix this issue. It's just kind of a personal preference thing. Another slightly even more petty change to the port lineup for me, this isn't a huge deal, but it does just slightly bother me. They rearranged the ports on the back of the system where the HDMI is now located on the opposite end rather than being right next to the power, which means that when you're using it in tower mode, instead of having HDMI and power cables both running into the bottom, leaving the other ports opened up, the HDMI cable now plugs in higher up, meaning that it can lightly obstruct and be in the way when you're trying to plug things into the USB-A ports. Otherwise, the port setup is the same. We still have HDMI as the primary one for display, you have an Ethernet port, pair of USB-A, and the power port on the back. So all those physical changes aside, what's going on with the system on a functional level that differentiates it from the original? Honestly, not a whole lot. Ultimately, the internals of the system are basically the same as far as performance goes. It's the same kind of performance level as far as the card goes. It's not like we saw a die shrink on anything, so it's running things more efficiently. Performance-wise, it is effectively the same as the original PlayStation. And this works out the same as far as how it feels to use in day-to-day life. The fan noise on it isn't really any different. It's basically the same as it was in the original. Maybe the pitch sounds a little bit higher to me, but that might also just be dust in the older fan affecting how it works on my old PlayStation 5. The thermals aren't affected in any kind of way that's affecting the performance of the system. Same Wi-Fi connectivity. There's really no changes as far as performance of these systems go, which some people seem disappointed by, and I can kind of get, because it's like, oh, well, it's a new revision of the system. What else could they change? I mean, we just saw this happen with the Steam Deck, where the Steam Deck OLED has a whole bunch of little incremental changes and improvements over the regular model. But honestly, PlayStation didn't pitch this as anything other than it is, a refresh of the mainline PS5 that's replacing, and that's exactly what it does. If you already own an original PS5, there's not really any reason to grab this one, outside of the fact that you really like the smaller body and want to go that way. There are some minor upgrades worth noting. It does have a larger storage size than the original PS5. That shipped with an 825GB SSD, which translated to 665 worth of useful space, whereas this one ships with a full terabyte. That translates into about 818 gigabytes of useful space. So basically a 150GB bump, not large enough that you should necessarily upgrade your system to it. You might as well just spend that money on an SSD instead. But if you're in the market for getting your first PS5, that's an advantage this one offers the original worth noting. One hanging question for me personally, and there are people out there that I think can test this right now, but I'm not sure if they're actually been able to disclose just yet. No idea on whether or not this thing includes PlayStation Link. That's a new wireless connectivity type that PlayStation is introducing for their headsets. The PlayStation Portal is making use of it. It would make a lot of sense to me if this had it as well, but considering the fact that I just don't have access to a Pulse Explorer or Pulse Elite, I don't have a way of testing that just yet. I would really hope it does. It kind of feels like at this rate, the way that PlayStation hasn't openly talked about it, that it doesn't, but that's just going to be something I'll have to update on once I have my hands on a Pulse Explorer early in December. One other functional upgrade worth talking about with the system is the fact that unlike the original PS5, which came in two distinct models, digital only and disc supporting, this one is effectively just one single unit where you can buy the disc reader separately if you want to upgrade later down the line. I like how that opens up a little bit more modularity with the system if you wanted to convert it at one point in the future. It does not come with the digital only style cover if you buy the disc one, so you'd have to buy, a whole new cover set down the line if you wanted to do that for some reason. You do have to connect to the internet at least once to support the disc drive in the first place. Even buying this one where they came already pre-packaged together and it wasn't something like I bought the disc drive later, you still have to do that online check. That is not a permanent thing where you have to do an online check every time the system turns on, but it is necessary for the initial setup of the disk drive. And of course, just like the original PS5, this has an expandable storage bay that is just as easy to access. It's the same deal. Open up a cover, reveal the bay, plug it in, you're good to go. I took the one out of my old PS5, put it in this one, no problem. Honestly, at the end of the day, as things are right now, this seems like a pretty straightforward refresh that doesn't shake anything up in any wild way. You get a little more storage space, it's a smaller system, but as of this moment, it doesn't seem like there's any kind of major change where there's a huge debate over what the definitive better one to play on is. We might see something in the very long run where, because of how certain internal parts work, maybe one of them ends up having a bit better lifespan, but as of right now, testing them when they are brand new systems, it's very much the same experience. So if you were interested in grabbing your first PS5 and you were curious about this one versus the original, there's not really a massive difference right now. You get a little more storage space with this one, which is nice, but if you like the look of the original and you're fine with the larger size and losing out on a little storage space, totally fine, worth grabbing. I would say as far as just value to dollar goes, especially because these are being shipped right now with included games like Spider-Man 2 or Modern Warfare 3, this is the slightly better deal just because you're getting that game and a little more storage space. So yeah, not really an interesting shift or change from the original model. I think ultimately it just comes down to which one you think looks better. Personally, I like the look of this one more. I think that's a slightly less common take based on things I've been seeing other people say. I just like the slightly smaller body and the little line added and the gloss matte mix. I think that's kind of neat. I certainly know people that like the look of the original more, and if that's the case, awesome, go ahead and grab that one instead. Those are my thoughts on this new PlayStation 5. Call it the PS5 Slim if you want. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later with a bunch more PlayStation stuff soon.